And definitely are very outspoken and are passionate about other causes as well. Talk
Yeah.
to me about some of the stuff that you've done to help out with in your community over the years.
Yeah, one thing that I really believe in and it's really important to me is women's rights. I'm a proud feminist and I've been this way for a long time now, for definitely over 10 years at this point. And I always feel weird about when people tell me, "Oh, you like it or you're into it or you're interested in it." I really don't view it that way. I feel like it's almost like having an optic, it's like having a lens, right? That once you snap it onto your camera that your brain is, you can't really take it off because you see the world differently. And me trying to help and trying to do something in that regard doesn't come from enjoyment necessarily. It comes from feeling like that's something that's right and feeling like that's something that I have the capacity and I have the platform to do. So I have to do it. I have to do it not in the way that like someone's forcing me, right? But in the way that I believe in it. So something that I started out with when I was very young, when I was like 20 years old, was public talks. I actually had my university in Russia help me with it and help me get spots at different conventions. So I had some public talks about rape culture, about women's rights, about like the invisibility of women in societal issues. And that's something that I've carried over to wrestling as well because I feel like no issue in any given business, and wrestling is no exception, is just an isolated issue. I think anything that happens in wrestling is ultimately a reflection of the real world around us. So a lot of the time when something bad happens in wrestling, people are like, oh, wrestlers are horrible, or like, oh, this business is horrible. No, it's not that. It's the society, it's the people, it's the mindset, it's a cultural background, cultural context that we exist in. So I've been very outspoken about women's rights and representation in wrestling as well, and not just women's, just inclusion on the whole, and that covers all intersections. We call ourselves intersectional feminists because there's different types of oppression and there's different types of social setbacks that people experience, and they intersect within each other. So, like I said, for example, like if you're a woman, you're going to have certain hardships, but if you're a Black woman, you're going to have even more hardship because those are the two intersections. So I've been, trying to platform people who can talk about their experiences and especially people who have experienced things that I haven't as a white woman, as a cisgender woman. So I've tried to platform, trans women, women of color, to be able to talk about their struggles and also, LGBTQ plus wrestlers. I had a show with High Spots that was called Did That Show, uh, where that was, it took a lot of work because it wasn't something that I usually would do because I like in-person things. I don't really like digital things as much because I just feel like the energy is different, but it was a product of its time. It was 2020, so it was the COVID times. So we had 3 episodes where every episode had a guest, a female wrestler on it. And in every episode, we talked about a different form of oppression that women face in wrestling. And they talked about their experience with it while I was also given a theoretical background on it. So that's something that I definitely would like to revisit in the future, but it's something that I'm proud of. So it's honestly, it's not, to me, it's not a thing in itself. It's just a lens that I view the world through. And I don't think there's barely any piece of content that I've created that doesn't have this lens on it.
And you've also donated to some organizations as well.
I have, yeah. Another cause that really like breaks my heart, honestly, whenever I hear about it is um, female genital mutilation. And it's something that blows my mind that's still a problem in our society. And I've donated some of the proceeds from my merch to organizations who combat that. I've also planned to do that with my cameo. With my cameo, I'm having complications because I'm in Spain, and apparently you can't have a cameo in Spain. So I'm trying to figure out a way to do it outside of that. But it's something that's so crazy overlooked, and it's just and even honestly, like even the name, because some people call it like female circumcision, and I'm very, very against that name because it does not at all represent what happens. Because when you say that, people who are not informed, which there's no crime in not yet being informed, hear it and go like, well, but there's male circumcision that happens all the time. I'm pretty against that too, but that's a whole different topic, right? But it's not at all that. It's an outdated practice that's specifically aimed at making women disabled, at making women submit, at making women depend on men. And there's been so many refugees who've had to deal with it and have had to have corrective surgery. So it's something that's just one of the more horrible things that happen in the world today. So I really believe in helping stop that.
Yeah, I mean, if you find something that you're really passionate about, helping is just so important just because so many people are going through so much. So it's important to stand for those and fight for those rights.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And like I said, it's something that you can't forget. Once you've learned, you can't unlearn. And a lot of the time in my career, I've been told to tone it down. I've been told to maybe don't ask pointed questions, maybe don't bring up this topic, maybe don't be like so outspoken about how you're feminist this, feminist that. But it's hard at this point. It's hard to not be that.
Yeah, I mean, it's, it's horrible, what women go through and people that have been abused and neglected, and we can only want them to feel safe and feel like they're protected and they have a voice and a platform like what you're doing right now. Why do you feel passionate about giving back to your community?
Ooh, that's a good question. I don't know, maybe because I feel like when we're talking wrestling, right? When you say my community, I think wrestling immediately because ultimately my community is intertwined with wrestling. I barely even have any non-wrestling friends. So when I think my community, I think wrestling. And I think it's such a multifaceted question because first of all, it's me being a woman in wrestling and me having experienced all of that. And I feel for other women in the business because I know what it's like, and I want to like I haven't experienced that many terrible things, but I have experienced some pretty bad things, and I wouldn't want anyone to ever go through that again, and that's why I do that. But then, like when it comes to inclusion, it's just that I feel like the beauty of wrestling is that it is for everyone and it can be for everyone. And the more diverse it is, the better, and the more beautiful and wonderful and robust the product is going to be. And the more people are going to feel included, the more fans are going to feel included. The more people are going to feel like they do have a place in wrestling and they can train and they can become this. The more role models they have. So I feel like it's so important because if we only have like white straight dudes in wrestling, how boring is that going to be? It's just counterintuitive for anyone who's even remotely in wrestling. It's just not something that anyone would want to watch. But then when it comes to smaller promotions, for example, like I started in a small promotion that wasn't small for Russia. It's the biggest and the oldest promotion in Russia, IWF Russia, Independent Wrestling Federation. It's my first home promotion and I love it dearly. But in the scope of the world of wrestling, it's a tiny little thing. It's a tiny drop in the ocean. And that's why I wanted to spotlight the Romanian wrestling school because for me it's just incredible to see a whole new scene bud in a small country and there's nothing and like there's a group of like 20 people and that's it. That's the entire wrestling scene and that's crazy. But a lot of people look down on like indie wrestling like that. But I truly feel like that's where the heart and soul and spirit of wrestling lives. If it wasn't for those promotions, we wouldn't have AEW, we wouldn't have WWE, we wouldn't have, I don't know, TNA, because they wouldn't have the material, they wouldn't
Yeah.
have the talent, they wouldn't have the fans. Because, like I said, I didn't experience that, but a lot of Americans do. That like your dad brings you to your first indie show, and you see the bumps right in front of you. You high five the wrestler. You see the sweat, the tears, the blood, and it's just so much more personal and so much more alive than any WWE show would ever be.
Yeah.
So I feel like it's important to cultivate those. And that honestly applies to any industry, not just wrestling. If you
Mhm.
love anything, music, theater, drag, whatever it may be, go support your local scene because that's where it flourishes and that's what uplifts it.